My name is Emily Carter, and I'm 36 years old. People often tell me that grief arrives like a storm. For me, it came quietly on a Wednesday morning. With the shrill ring of my phone just after sunrise, I knew before I answered. Calls that early never bring good news. The hospice nurse's voice was soft, almost apologetic. My condolences. Emily, your grandmother passed peacefully in her sleep, a little before 5 this morning. For a few seconds, I couldn't breathe. Then everything around me became strangely silent. I don't remember hanging up. I only remember sitting on the edge of my bed, staring at the floor, while tears rolled down my face without warning. I cried for nearly an hour. Not because her death was unexpected. She was 91 and had lived a remarkable life, but because the woman who had been my entire world was suddenly gone. My parents died in a car accident when I was 7 years old. After that, my grandmother became everything. She attended every parent-teacher conference. She packed every school lunch. She stayed awake when I had nightmares. She celebrated every birthday, every graduation, every tiny achievement, as though it were the greatest accomplishment in history. She had been an elementary school teacher for 4 decades. She believed kindness mattered more than talent, and hard work mattered more than luck. She lived modestly. She drove the same faded Toyota Camry for nearly 20 years. She clipped grocery coupons with almost religious dedication. She never bought expensive clothes, never chased luxury, never complained. At the time, I assumed she simply didn't have much money. I couldn't have been more wrong. The funeral passed in a blur of flowers, hymns, old photographs, and stories from former students who were now grandparents themselves. They remembered her patience, her warmth, the way she somehow made every child believe they mattered, listening to them. I realized she had spent her entire life making other people feel safe. I wanted to honor that. About a week after the funeral, the estate attorney called. He asked me to come into his office. I expected paperwork. Maybe a few $1,000s. Perhaps the house. Instead, he opened a thick folder and quietly said something that completely changed my life. Emily, your grandmother left you everything. She had been my mother's only child. I was her only grandchild. There were no competing heirs, no complicated family disputes. The estate consisted of investment accounts that had quietly grown for decades. Along with her home, my grandfather, who had died 20 years earlier, had apparently made several incredibly successful investments back in the 1970s. Neither of them had touched the money. They simply allowed it to grow. By the time taxes, fees, and minor debts were settled, my inheritance totaled roughly $1 million. I sat frozen. I wasn't excited. I wasn't thinking about wealth. I kept wondering why Grandma never spent any of it. Why she'd continued driving that aging car. Why she'd denied herself vacations and luxuries. The attorney smiled gently, as if he'd heard that question many times before. She once told me, he said, I already have everything I need. I'd rather Emily have choices someday than comforts today. I cried all over again. That evening, I told my boyfriend. His name was Daniel Brooks. We had been together for 7 years. He worked in retail management. I was a mid-level accountant for a manufacturing company. Together we earned around $140,000 a year. We weren't struggling. We rented a comfortable apartment. We both had car payments. We'd managed to save about $30,000. Our life wasn't glamorous, but it was stable. When I told Daniel about my grandmother's death, he immediately wrapped me in his arms. I'm so sorry, he whispered. She was an incredible woman. For a moment, I remembered exactly why I'd fallen in love with him. Then I mentioned the inheritance. He blinked. Wait. How much? I repeated the number. His eyebrows shot upward. Emily. That's life-changing. He sat down slowly. We could finally buy a house. We could pay off both cars. We could travel. We could actually live. I noticed something. He kept saying, we. At first, I ignored it. Maybe I was overly sensitive because I was still grieving. Over the next 3 months, the estate slowly worked through probate. While I waited, Daniel slowly changed. At first, the differences were small. He started sending me online listings, not modest starter homes, massive houses, 5 bedrooms, swimming pools, 3-car garages, prices around $650,000. Look at this one, he'd say excitedly. We can afford it now. Whenever I hesitated, he'd laugh. Why are you thinking so small? Then he bought himself an expensive designer watch, nearly $3,000. I only found out because I noticed the receipt sitting in the shopping bag. When I asked him about it, he shrugged. I deserve something nice. We're going to be rich anyway. The inheritance hadn't even reached me yet. Still, I tried convincing myself he was simply excited. That changed one Thursday evening. We were eating takeout at our kitchen table. Nothing fancy, just noodles and spring rolls. Daniel set down his fork and looked directly at me. His expression felt unfamiliar, cold, carefully calculated. We need to talk about your inheritance. Something inside me tightened. Okay. I've been researching inheritance law. I stayed silent. In this state, he continued, inheritances are separate property unless they're mixed with marital assets. I nodded slowly. Generally, yes. His jaw tightened. That's not fair. What do you mean? We've built this life together. If you keep it separate, I'd never have any legal claim to it. The room suddenly felt colder. I stared at him. You've been researching how to claim my grandmother's money. His voice sharpened. I've been researching how to protect our future. Don't twist it. My grandmother left that money to me. His eyes hardened. We're together. Emily, what's yours should become ours. My name should be on those accounts. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My grandmother trusted me. Not us. Me. His chair scraped across the floor as he stood. I've given you 7 years of my life. I've supported you. I've stood beside you. And now you're acting like I deserve nothing. I felt my heartbeat pounding in my ears. What exactly makes you believe you're entitled to my grandmother's life savings? His face turned crimson. I cook. I clean. I stayed when things got difficult. I invested in this relationship. Then his voice became frighteningly calm. So, here's the choice. Transfer that inheritance into joint ownership. Or we're done. The words hung in the air like ice. I looked at the man I thought I knew, the man I had imagined building a future with, the man who should have been helping me mourn. Instead, all he could see was a number. $1.1 million. I lowered my eyes to my untouched dinner. Then I quietly looked back at him. You're right, about one thing. His expression softened. He smiled. I knew you'd come around. I didn't answer. I simply finished my meal in silence. But that night, while he slept peacefully beside me, I lay awake staring into the darkness. By sunrise, I had already made my decision. Instead of transferring my grandmother's inheritance, I took a personal day from work and walked into the office of one of the best estate planning attorneys in the city. I intended to protect the last gift my grandmother would ever give me. The attorney's office occupied the top floor of an older brick building downtown. It wasn't flashy, There were no marble floors or oversized chandeliers, just polished oak furniture, shelves packed with law books, and framed certificates lining the walls. Somehow, that made me trust the place even more. I spent nearly 4 hours there. By the time I walked out, my understanding of the inheritance had completely changed. My grandmother wanted this money to give me security. I told the attorney, not to become the reason someone controls my life. He folded his hands across his desk. Then let's make sure that's exactly what happens. He explained something called a spendthrift trust. I had never heard the term before. He drew diagrams, explained beneficiary rights, trustee responsibilities, and why the law treated inherited assets differently from marital property. The most important thing, he said, tapping a document with his pen, is timing. I listened carefully. If the inheritance goes directly from your grandmother's estate into the trust before it ever becomes part of your personal accounts or shared finances, it remains separate property. So Daniel can't touch it, he answered carefully. I never like saying never. But legally, he would have an extremely difficult time making any successful claim. What if we break up? The trust still owns the principal. What if he sues? The trust owns the principal. What if he threatens me? The trust still owns the principal. The attorney smiled faintly. The point is simple. Your grandmother left this money to you. You have every legal right to preserve her wishes. That sentence settled something inside me. Until then, a small part of me had wondered whether protecting the inheritance made me selfish. Now I realized it wasn't selfish at all. It was responsible. The legal fees came to just over $3,000. It felt expensive. Then I remembered Daniel casually spending nearly the same amount on a watch before a single dollar of the inheritance had even reached me. Suddenly, the fee felt like the smartest investment I'd ever make. Within days, every asset transferred directly into the irrevocable spendthrift trust. The trust, not me, became the legal owner. A professional fiduciary company served as trustee. I remained the beneficiary, meaning I could receive approved distributions when appropriate, but I couldn't simply empty the account whenever I pleased. At first, the arrangement sounded restrictive. Then the attorney smiled. Sometimes, he said, protecting yourself means protecting yourself from future versions of people you already know. Those words stayed with me. When I returned home that evening, Daniel greeted me with a smile so warm it almost made me doubt everything. There you are. He kissed my forehead. I made your favorite pasta. For nearly a week afterward, he became the perfect boyfriend again. He brought me coffee before work. He rubbed my shoulders while I watched television. He apologized for getting emotional during our argument. I just want us to have a beautiful future. Every sentence included us. Every conversation eventually drifted toward houses. I found another neighborhood today. This one has amazing schools. We don't even have kids. I reminded him. He laughed. We will someday. We should think ahead. Then he'd start talking about landscaping, swimming pools, kitchen renovations, vacation homes. Every dream seemed to begin with money that wasn't even his. I watched him carefully, not with anger anymore. With clarity. The attorney had been right. Sometimes people reveal themselves only after believing they've already won. Friday evening arrived. Daniel opened a bottle of wine. He looked happier than I'd seen him in months. So, when does everything officially transfer? I calmly set my glass down. It already did. His face lit up instantly. It did. Seriously. That's incredible. He grinned. I guess we should make an appointment with a financial advisor. And maybe a realtor. I nodded once. It already transferred. Into the trust. His smile froze. What? The inheritance. It's now owned by a spendthrift trust. Silence. I watched the excitement slowly disappear from his face. What does that mean? It means the trust owns the assets. I'm the beneficiary. The trustee controls distributions. He blinked several times. I don't understand. It means the inheritance is legally protected. Protected from what? I looked directly into his eyes. Among other things, it's protected from divorce. The color drained from his face. No. I remained calm. You told me to transfer my grandmother's inheritance, or you'd end our relationship. So I made sure no one could ever force me to choose between protecting her legacy and protecting myself. He stared at me as though I'd spoken another language. You actually did it. Yes. You locked away over $1 million. I protected it. His breathing became heavier. You can't just do that. I already did. His voice rose. That's our future. My grandmother left it to me. We're together. I know. Then what's yours should be mine. I shook my head. No? His expression twisted into disbelief. You don't trust me. I trusted you. Until you gave me an ultimatum. For a brief moment, I thought he might calm down. Instead, he slammed his hand against the kitchen table. This is financial abuse. The words echoed through the apartment. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny. Because it was unbelievable. No. This is financial protection. There's a difference. His face reddened with anger. Without another word, he grabbed his phone. I heard the ringtone. Then a familiar voice exploded through the speaker. Before he even finished explaining. His mother? What? She did what? Daniel paced across the living room. Mom? She put everything into some trust. No. I can't get access. Within 20 minutes. Someone pounded on our apartment door. 3 loud knocks. Daniel opened it before I could move. His mother, Linda Brooks, stormed inside, without waiting to be invited. She didn't greet me, didn't ask how I was, didn't mention my grandmother. She walked straight into the living room, as though she owned the place. What kind of woman treats the man she loves like this? I stood quietly. What kind of boyfriend threatens to leave his grieving partner unless she hands over her inheritance? She pointed a finger at me. Marriage. We're not married. I interrupted calmly. She hesitated. Relationship. Partnership. Same thing. No. It isn't. Her expression hardened. Daniel deserves security. So do I. Then share the money. My grandmother already decided who she wanted to share it with. You're selfish. I'm respecting her wishes. She laughed bitterly. You're controlling. I'm protecting myself. She took a step closer. My son stood beside you for 7 years. And I loved him for 7 years. Then prove it. I already did. How? By believing he loved me. Neither of them spoke. For just a second, I saw something flicker across Daniel's face. Guilt. Regret. Or maybe disappointment that guilt wasn't working. His mother quickly recovered. You know what? My son deserves better. Maybe he does. But he deserves someone who trusts him. I did. Until he demanded my grandmother's money? Silence filled the apartment. Finally, Linda grabbed her purse. This isn't over. I know. She stormed toward the door. Daniel followed her into the hallway. I heard muffled voices. Angry whispers. Planning. When he came back inside, he walked straight past me. He shut himself inside the bedroom. For 2 full days. He barely spoke. No apology. No conversation. Only cold silence. On Monday afternoon, an envelope arrived by certified mail. Inside were legal papers. Daniel had hired a family law attorney. The demands were astonishing. Complete disclosure of every asset, immediate dissolution of the trust, division of the inheritance, long-term financial support. I carried the documents directly to my attorney. He read them carefully. Then, to my surprise, he chuckled. Actually chuckled. They can certainly ask. He closed the folder. That doesn't mean the law requires you to give them any of it. So what happens now? We respond. Calmly. Professionally. And we let the law do its job. A few days later, our response went out. Full financial disclosure. Of course. Division of legitimate shared assets. Absolutely. Dissolving the trust. Impossible. The trust was irrevocable. The inheritance had never entered shared ownership. The legal foundation was solid. When Daniel's attorney received our response, the aggressive tone that had filled the first letter suddenly disappeared. For the first time, I suspected someone on the other side had begun explaining the reality Daniel refused to hear. The battle had officially begun. 3 weeks later, Daniel and I sat across from each other in a mediation room that smelled faintly of coffee and old paper. The room was deliberately neutral. Gray carpet, beige walls, a round wooden table designed to make everyone feel equal. But nothing about that morning felt equal. Daniel arrived wearing the dark navy suit he usually reserved for weddings and job interviews. His mother came with him, although she wasn't permitted inside the actual mediation session. She waited in the lobby, gripping her handbag and glaring at me as if I had personally robbed her family. Daniel's attorney sat beside him. Mine sat beside me. At the head of the table was the mediator, a calm woman in her early 60s named Margaret Ellis. She had silver hair, reading glasses, and the exhausted patience of someone who had spent decades watching people destroy relationships over money. She began by explaining the process. We are here to identify the marital property, discuss possible settlement terms, and determine whether both sides can avoid a prolonged court battle. Daniel leaned forward before she had even finished. The trust shouldn't exist. Margaret looked at him over the rim of her glasses. Your attorney will have an opportunity to present your position. It's a shell, Daniel continued. She created it to hide money from me. My attorney placed one hand lightly on my arm, reminding me to stay silent. Margaret turned toward Daniel's lawyer. Counsel. His attorney cleared his throat. We contend that the timing of the trust's creation raises concerns. It was established immediately following a domestic dispute regarding the inheritance. Margaret nodded. And what is your legal theory? Daniel's attorney paused. Retaliatory intent. My attorney responded immediately. My client received an inheritance that was legally classified as separate property. Her boyfriend then threatened to end their 7-year relationship unless she transferred those assets into joint ownership. She sought legal advice and protected the inheritance before it was ever commingled. Daniel's jaw tightened. She did it to punish me. I finally spoke. No. Daniel. Everyone looked at me. I kept my voice steady. I did it because you told me exactly what you would do if I refused. His face reddened. I was angry. You were specific. I didn't mean it. You researched the law first. The room went silent. That was the detail he could never explain away. He hadn't shouted something reckless in the middle of an emotional argument. He had studied inheritance law. He had discovered that he had no automatic claim. Then, he had tried to pressure me into giving him one. Margaret folded her hands. Mr. Brooks, establishing a trust for inherited property is not fraudulent merely because it occurs after a relationship conflict. But we were supposed to build a life together. That may be emotionally relevant, she said gently, but it does not create ownership. Daniel looked at his attorney. Do something. His lawyer shifted uncomfortably. We would also argue that Ms. Carter had previously expressed an intention to use the inheritance for the couple's shared future. My attorney opened a folder. Do you have written evidence of that promise? Daniel answered quickly. She talked about buying a house. I looked at him. I said we could discuss our options. Exactly. Discussing options is not promising you $500,000. His attorney tried again. Mr. Brooks understood the inheritance would benefit the relationship. Understanding something, my attorney replied, does not make it legally true. Margaret nodded slowly. I agree. Daniel stared at her. So that's it. No one cares that I gave 7 years of my life to her. The words hit me harder than I expected. Not because they were true, because of the way he said them. Like loving me had been an investment, like the relationship had matured, and he was now entitled to collect the return. Margaret's voice softened. Time spent in a relationship is not a purchase price for another person's inheritance. Daniel leaned back in his chair. His eyes filled with tears. This isn't fair. For one brief second, I almost felt sorry for him. Then I remembered the night he had smiled. After believing his ultimatum worked, the expensive houses, the new watch, the way he had asked about my grandmother's money before asking whether I was sleeping or eating or surviving the grief, I said nothing. My attorney had warned me before the session. Don't react to tears. Anger. Or accusation. Mediation isn't about proving who suffered more. It's about facts. So I focused on the facts. The trust had received the inheritance directly. No money had entered our shared accounts. No trust distributions had been made. Daniel's name appeared nowhere in my grandmother's will. The legal structure was valid. The argument against it was almost entirely emotional. The mediation ended without an agreement. But as we walked out, I saw Daniel's attorney whisper something to him in the hallway. Daniel's face changed. He looked stunned. Then, furious. His mother hurried toward him. What happened? He didn't answer. He simply brushed past her and walked toward the elevator. Over the next 2 weeks, his attorney tried 3 more approaches. First, they claimed I had made an implied promise that the inheritance would become shared property. There was no proof. Second, they suggested my grandmother had intended the money to support both of us because she knew Daniel and had welcomed him into the family. My grandmother's will named only me. No ambiguity. No shared beneficiary. No mention of Daniel. Third, they requested an accounting of any money distributed from the trust that might have improved our shared lifestyle. The answer was simple. Zero. On my attorney's advice, I had taken nothing. Not $1. The longer the case continued, the weaker their arguments became, and the weaker their legal position became. The worse Daniel behaved, he began missing work. At first, he called in sick. Then, he simply stopped showing up. His manager issued 2 written warnings. A week later, Daniel was placed on final notice. When I asked why he was risking his job, he laughed bitterly. Because you ruined my life. I stood in the kitchen, staring at him. You still have your job. For now. You still have your car. You still have your savings. You still have everything you had before my grandmother died. He looked at me with open resentment. That's the point. You got more. There it was. The truth? He didn't believe he had been harmed. He simply couldn't tolerate that I had received something he couldn't control. Most nights, he stayed at his mother's house. But he continued keeping clothes in our apartment. He continued using the car, whose payments I helped cover. He continued eating groceries I bought whenever he came home. It was as though he wanted to leave me, while preserving every convenience of being with me. One evening, his mother called. I had blocked her number. But she used Daniel's phone. "My son is falling apart," she said. "Then he should speak to a therapist. He needs fairness. He needs to accept the law. He gave you the best years of his life." I closed my eyes. They had rehearsed the same line. He was 30 when we met. "Linda. He is 37 now. He didn't donate his life to me. You used him." "How?" "He helped you through difficult times. And I helped him. He deserves something. He will receive his share of anything we actually own together." That's not enough. That sentence told me everything. Not enough. It was never about fairness. It was about the size of the number. I lowered my voice. My grandmother taught children for 40 years. She raised my mother alone after my grandfather died. Then she raised me after my parents were killed. She saved that money by denying herself things she could have enjoyed. Linda Schofield. She's dead. Emily. I stopped breathing for a moment. The cruelty was so casual that it felt almost unreal. Then she continued. "The money should help the living." I stared at the dark window above the kitchen sink. My reflection looked older than it had a month earlier. "It is helping the living. It's protecting me." I ended the call. Then I blocked Daniel's number too. That night, I sat alone in the apartment and opened an old photograph album. There was Grandma standing beside me on my first day of school. Grandma at my high school graduation. Grandma holding my college diploma with both hands as if it were made of gold. In every picture, she looked proud. Not because I was wealthy, not because I was successful, because I was hers. For weeks, I had been thinking of the trust as a legal shield. That night, I finally understood it was something else. It was a boundary, a final line between love and exploitation. The last hearing was scheduled for the following week. 2 days before it, my attorney called. Daniel's lawyer contacted me. My stomach tightened. What did he want? He wants to discuss a realistic settlement. What changed? There was a brief pause. I believe his attorney finally convinced him that the trust is untouchable. I looked at the photograph of my grandmother beside my bed. For the first time since the case began, I allowed myself to breathe. Daniel had spent weeks believing persistence would somehow transform greed into a legal right. Now, even his own attorney understood the truth. The inheritance was never his, and soon, a judge would make that impossible for him to deny. The final hearing took place on a cold Monday morning. I arrived 20 minutes early with my attorney and sat on a wooden bench outside the courtroom, listening to the faint echo of footsteps against the marble floor. Daniel arrived with his mother. He looked different. His suit was wrinkled. There were dark circles beneath his eyes. The confidence he had carried into mediation was gone. Linda walked beside him with one hand wrapped around his arm, whispering urgently as though she could somehow coach him into a better outcome. When Daniel saw me, he stopped. For a moment, neither of us moved. 7 years together, reduced to a silent hallway, and 2 attorneys carrying folders filled with evidence of how completely we had failed. Then the courtroom doors opened. The hearing itself was surprisingly brief. After months of threats, letters, accusation, and legal maneuvering, the truth came down to numbers. Our legitimate shared assets totaled approximately $67,000. That included our joint savings, retirement contributions accumulated during the relationship, and the small amount of equity in our vehicles. The inheritance was listed separately, protected, untouched. My grandmother's money never entered our joint finances. Not $1 had been spent on shared expenses. Not one distribution had been made before the proceedings began. Daniel's attorney stood and addressed the judge. His voice lacked the aggression of his earlier letters. "Your Honor, My client maintains that the trust was established in response to conflict within the relationship. The judge looked down at the documents. Was the inheritance separate property when received? Yes. Your Honor. Was it ever deposited into a jointly held account? No. Was the trust legally established? Yes. Was there evidence of fraudulent concealment? Daniel's attorney hesitated. No. Your Honor? The judge leaned back. Then, the motivation for protecting legally separate property does not change its classification. Daniel shifted in his seat. His mother was not allowed inside. But I could almost feel her anger waiting beyond the courtroom doors. The judge continued through the remaining issues. Each person would retain their own vehicle and assume the corresponding debt. Each would keep their personal belongings. Retirement assets would be divided only where legally required. The remaining cash would be split, according to the settlement calculation. Daniel received his car, his personal property, his retirement account, and approximately $16,000 after legal costs. And the final division? He received no support payments. The judge found no valid basis. Our incomes had been similar. Daniel was capable of working. His recent employment difficulties had resulted from his own attendance problems, not from anything I had done. Then came the question that had consumed him for months. The judge glanced toward his attorney. Are there any remaining claims regarding the trust assets? Daniel turned sharply toward the man beside him. His attorney stared at the table for several seconds. The courtroom was completely silent. Then he stood. No. Your Honor. Daniel looked as though someone had struck him. His mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. That was the moment reality finally reached him. Not during our argument, not when I explained the trust, not during mediation, not after his attorney warned him repeatedly. It happened when his own lawyer stood before a judge and admitted there was nothing left to fight for. The case ended moments later. A clerk collected the final documents. The judge wished us both well. Then we walked out of the courtroom as strangers. Daniel caught up with me near the courthouse steps. Emily. I kept walking. Emily. Wait. My attorney looked at me. You don't have to speak with him. I know. But I stopped anyway. Daniel stood several feet away, breathing heavily. You planned this. His voice shook. You planned all of it from the beginning. No. Yes. You did. You waited until the money came. And then you trapped me. I stared at him. I protected myself after you gave me an ultimatum. I was angry. You researched inheritance law before that conversation. His expression tightened. I was thinking about our future. You were thinking about your access. That's not true. Then why did every conversation begin with my grandmother's money and end with what you wanted to buy? He looked away. Cars moved slowly along the street behind us. People passed carrying coffee and briefcases, unaware that a 7-year relationship was ending beside them. Daniel rubbed both hands over his face. I could have made you happy. The sentence hurt more than I expected, not because I believed him, because there had been a time when I already was happy. Before the inheritance, before the houses, before the ultimatum, you could have supported me while I was grieving. I said, you could have asked whether I was sleeping, whether I missed her, whether I was ready to deal with the estate. Instead, you calculated what the money could buy you. His eyes filled with anger again. You chose money over me. No. I shook my head. You forced me to choose between you and my safety. And when I chose safety, you proved why I needed it. His face hardened. You'll regret this. You'll sit alone in some empty house surrounded by money and realize you threw away a real relationship. A real relationship doesn't require an entrance fee. He flinched. I stepped closer, lowering my voice. I didn't leave because you wanted a house. I left because you saw my grandmother's death as an opportunity." Daniel looked toward the parking lot. Linda sat inside her car, watching us through the windshield. Even from a distance, I could see the hatred in her expression. He swallowed. "You think you're better than me now?" "No. I think I finally understand you." That was the last thing I said to him. He walked away without answering. Linda leaned across the passenger seat and pushed open the door for him. Before he climbed inside, she glared at me one final time. Then they drove away. I never spoke to either of them again. 2 months later, I moved out of the apartment. I paid the final rent, cleaned every room, returned the keys. The place looked almost exactly as it had before Daniel, and I filled it with 7 years of memories. That was the strange thing. A home could hold laughter, arguments, holidays, illnesses, promises, and betrayals. And after enough boxes were removed, it became only empty rooms. I requested one distribution from the trust, $40,000. I used it as the down payment on a modest townhouse. 3 bedrooms, a small backyard, a quiet street, no pool, no 3-car garage, no marble staircase. The first night there, I sat on the living room floor eating takeout from the carton because my furniture had not arrived. The silence felt different from the silence in the old apartment. It wasn't punishment. It was peace. The rest of the inheritance remained invested, growing slowly, protected, exactly as my grandmother intended, through mutual acquaintances. I heard Daniel eventually lost his job. The missed shifts and warnings caught up with him. He moved back into his mother's house and told anyone willing to listen that I had stolen his future. At first, hearing that made me angry. Then it made me sad. Eventually, it made me feel nothing. I had not stolen anything from Daniel. I simply refused to let him take something that had never belonged to him. People sometimes ask whether I feel guilty. The honest answer is no. My grandmother taught elementary school for 40 years. She raised my mother after becoming a widow. Then she raised me after my parents died. She drove the same car for 18 years, clipped coupons, skipped vacations, saved quietly. She did not build that inheritance so someone could threaten her granddaughter into surrendering it. She left me more than money. She left me choices, security, a chance to build a life without fear. For months, I believed the trust protected her fortune. Eventually, I understood that it also protected her final lesson. Love does not demand ownership. Partnership does not require surrender. And anyone who looks at a grieving woman and calculates his percentage has already revealed what he values most. Daniel believed I chose money over him. He was wrong. I chose dignity. I chose clarity. And most of all, I chose to honor the woman who spent her entire life protecting me. This time, I protected what she left behind.